Welcome to the Business Spotlight, where today the spotlight is shining on Kate Lander from Ivy House. Welcome, Kate.
Hello, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much for being here. To start with, tell our viewers and our listeners a little bit more about you and the business, please.
No problem at all. So I've been CEO at Ivy House now for coming up to almost 5 years. The business is about 6 years old, so a fascinating 6 years to have been setting up and running a business. It's certainly been an eventful one. I guess kind of from a headline perspective, what does Ivy House do? We would view ourselves as a leadership and talent development business. Okay. So I always hesitate from saying we're a training company, because we actually very much are our own content creators. So we're innovators on content. We have our own IP, and our real focus is around changing human behaviors and the development of leadership. So the business was actually set up by Elka Edwards, who's our founder. She'd previously set up a business called Blue Sky. She'd subsequently sold that. And Elka and I got introduced, had a couple of lunches, and I think both really had this burning passion to change organizations, but through their people. And just changing it at the top isn't going to work. Too often, leadership training, as I had as MD of a bank for many years, all of that leadership training and executive training is focused on that top tier. But that actually isn't going to make the biggest difference. So a lot of our work is actually supporting behavioural change, helping people understand themselves better at the talent and even moving into that early career space now.
I love that. So would you say that compared to maybe other leadership style companies, your competitors out there, that's where you differ because you focus on that on a different level?
Yeah, I'd say I think the difference comes in two areas. First, I think, is that audience. You know, when we set up, we were very much focused on the talent space. You know, that kind of forgotten middle. You know, there was the grad programs, and a lot of our clients are financial services or professional services. There's always been that huge investment in grads, the big grad programs. And then there's the executive bit. And then there was the bit in the middle, the people that actually do the work, that particularly as we had millennials come into that space, thought differently, behaved differently, had different expectations. Yeah. COVID just has put that on steroids to a whole different level because of that sort of process. So definitely when we set up, we were focused on actually to really change organizations, because this is about making society better, making the economy better, changing organizations to be successful, better places at work, happier places to work. We knew that we needed to influence those connectors, the people between the early careers and the leadership. What we've found, though, as we've progressed, is that kind of work spread. So we do some executive work, and we've seen a big increase in interest around early careers. So I talk about early careers rather than grads now, because school leavers and apprenticeship programs, and I think it's a much broader spectrum. The other part where I think we differ quite a lot is that we very much come at it from our processes and our content, and all of that always has to start with the individual. So we will never go in and support a company with, okay, here's our values, can you just go and make sure people understand them? That isn't what we're about. And if a client asks us to do that and create them a leadership program, it's not for us, right? We are not your person. So every program that we do, they have to buy the bit that goes, help your people understand who they are, because if they can't lead themselves, they're never going to lead anybody else.
Absolutely love that. How do you, and you've already alluded to it, COVID's put everything on steroids around this kind of area, but how do you as a business adapt quickly? Because with, diversion, inclusion, working from home, leading with teams scattered everywhere, how do you now go, oh my goodness, this is here to stay, we need to do something with this?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think the first part is perhaps supporting companies through some of that thinking. But I think it's really interesting now that you picked up on there a number of issues that are going on in the workplace. But actually, if you strip them back to the challenges that's behind them, they're often incredibly similar. So if you think about diversity and inclusion, what is it about? It's about helping people understand, talk to each other, build relationships, have conversations, have difficult conversations, okay? If you talk about people working remotely, what's it about? It's about knowing your preferences, how you show up, how you have conversations, how you build relationships, so actually if you strip back the labels, and we're really good at putting labels on stuff these days, aren't we? Okay. But if you actually take that step back and say, what are the human skills that are necessary to lead what Ivy House calls an extraordinary life, which is both in work, play, and everything else in your life, then you strip it back and you look at what those core human skills are. They're pretty similar. So yes, what we might do is tailor some of the examples that we use for diversity and inclusion programs working from home. And when we look at case studies, we might have a different lens on some of those. But essentially, all of our programs start with those same principles, that if you are going to work with people remotely, if you're going to be more inclusive when you're with your team, you've really got to understand who you are, recognize that you're different to all of the other people that you work with, and be able to engage with them in a really, what we would call adult way. So you're not playing the victim, you're not playing the parent, you're not playing the child, and build a relationship built on trust. Because if we can get people showing up to work, being, to use the very common phrase, authentic, but to be human, to be in their own place, to know what their strengths are, to understand where their weaknesses are, not necessarily solve them, but be really vulnerable and go, look, do you know what? If I sit at home in my office all day, by Friday, I'm a bit cranky, okay? Help me out, okay? And that's about remote working. It's not about saying remote working doesn't work, let's rip it up. It's not about saying those two populations can't talk to each other. We're all humans, okay? And although work has changed, technology has progressed very quickly. As humans, we are so slow to adapt. It's just our experiences have been different. So if we can help people understand how those experiences have shaped them, they'll understand how they show up differently to somebody else. And that's when you start having really powerful conversations. And I think the point about technology is really key, because people often go, a couple of people said to me, okay, why do you run a human skills and training business when technology is going to do away with all the jobs? I think completely the opposite, because actually technology is going to do all of what I would call the heavy lifting. The real differentiator is us to be able to have really intelligent, trusted conversations between each other to get that technology to do the work. So I actually think the focus on those human skills, being authentic, being able to change behaviors, being able to work with other people, being able to build trust, those are going to be the superpowers which, when combined with technology, make organizations fly.
Absolutely love that. Now, taking it to your business, you've been in business for 6 years, or, the business has been going for 6 years. COVID isn't obvious within that, but what kind of challenges have you had as an organization?
So I think so we were set up, we kind of started trading at the start of 2018. Okay, so I don't know about you, but 2018 sounds like a long time ago now.
It feels like an age ago, yes.
Weird, isn't it? And at that point in time, if we take our minds back, we were trundling along, we were trying to get the Brexit deal done here in the UK, we were trying to get all that stuff, but people were quite optimistic. And I think, interestingly, I also think we were perhaps a little bit ahead of our time at that point.
Okay.
Going in and going, actually, your talent really, think about it, millennials had only been in the workplace 4 or 5 years at that point in time. It wasn't perhaps, we were still in that blame culture of, we're not going to sort the problem, let's just blame the young people and the snowflakes, all of that kind of stuff. So I think when we embarked, what we saw was a few really forward-thinking organizations who were really going, actually, we can see what's going on here, we're going to do something different. So I would say that kind of first 12 to 18 months was really exciting. It felt as if was a bit of a sea change happening. We then got into Brexit and the whole kind of sort of trying to settle that sort of into 2019. And I think that created a little bit of nervousness in the wider ecosystem in which we work. And we certainly saw a few clients kind of just wanting to move forward, but holding back until they had certainty. Obviously, then December 2019 came along, certainty was granted, and we all thought that the world was going to fly. And then this noise started happening in early 2020. Hey, there's this thing happening over in China. Nah, it's never going to happen to us. And, you know, in February 2020, we were a face-to-face training business. Our business was putting up to 50 people in a room together with a lot of hugging, a lot of high five, and frankly, a lot of touching in the right way.
In the appropriate manner. In
the appropriate manner, obviously. But that was kind of our USP. You know, we sold it as a deeply personal experience in the room. So in March 2020, what we did was illegal. You know, suddenly you weren't allowed to put people in a room together, and it was quite scary. Being completely honest now, you know, we thought about incubating the business. Was this just too big an ask in order for us to do as a new company? And I guess kind of we did what I always think is the right thing to do, which is understand your market. So at that point, we jumped on a number of calls. None of us knew how to use this stuff at that point in time. We were all on mute.
Nobody really did.
Everybody's screen, everybody's cameras were on, off, and it wasn't working, and people were dropping off, and the kids were coming in the background. All of that kind of chaos in March 2020. And we spoke to our clients. And what became very clear very quickly was, number one, you know, I mean, some of our clients were, you know, some of the UK's leading brands, the Avivas of this world and stuff like that. And what became very clear to it was two things. This wasn't going away quickly. And I think UK PLC was far more understanding of the long-term implications of this. We also had a couple of pharmaceutical companies who obviously understood what was going on very well. So number one, it became crystal clear, and our clients were of that expectation that this is big, all right? This isn't just 3 weeks and we're all going to be out hugging each other again. This is big. Secondly, their big concern was what was going to happen to particularly the younger generations. So we had a couple of amazing clients, and my frustration is that good news never gets spread, but just to call out a few of our clients who said, look, we need you to pivot and be able to do this virtually for you, and we will back you. We recognize you're a small business, so we'll change our payment terms, we'll pay, you know, rather than sort of the normal stuff, we'll kind of try and accelerate stuff to help you.
Nice.
We sat down with the team. We were a much smaller team at that point. We had about 7 or 8 full-time staff. When I say we sat down, we metaphorically sat down. We all joined and
virtually, safely.
And we basically explained to the team that we wanted to give it a go. We felt that this could be a groundbreaking time for the business, but it was going to be tough. The team agreed to take a temporary pay cut. You know, we were a really small business. Stepped up, every single one of them, just absolutely amazing. And in a way, I think we probably did some of our best work at that point in time. There's nothing like a crisis to focus the minds. And it really, really made us only do the essential stuff, focus on what was needed. So we really didn't do any training for about 3 or 4 months. And in the background, we took it away, and we've got an amazing product team, and basically they said, we're not going to do this virtually unless we can do it as well, if not better, than in person.
Nice.
So what we weren't going to do was to be one of these companies that goes, let's take those teaching plans, stick it on camera, and just crack on. That wasn't doing our work justice, and it wasn't actually going to get the desired impact. So we had quite a lot of late night calls to tech companies in San Francisco and places, and really trying to find out the right technology, because in those days, Zoom, nobody trusted because it was having massive security breaches. Teams was so clunky, didn't have any breakout rooms or anything else. So we had to find a decent platform to use. And so we spent a lot of time sort of exploring, looking at different options, found the right platform, and we basically rebuilt our programs to be able to do virtually, to make it a deeply interactive experience with breakout groups, different experiences, high energy, music, dance, you know, just the whole different experience that filled the need at the time. And that really kicked off. So after about 3 to 4 months, we ran it. And yeah, since then, I'd probably say COVID was the best thing that ever happened to us, in hindsight. Okay, not at the time, in hindsight.
But hindsight's always 20/20 vision.
Yes.
So fantastic. Well, as a company, what have been some of your key learnings?
It's a really good question from a business side of things. I think look, the first takeaway is, I think what COVID really taught was, don't get caught up in what you want to do, only do what the market needs. And I think that's a really interesting learning from our first 3 years of business, may I say. Yeah. I think we kind of launched going, we know there's a problem coming and we're going to go and fix that problem. What we probably could have been better at in hindsight was, we know how we want to fix it, but nobody else is quite ready for us just yet. What I think we got much better at during COVID was, because nobody knew how things were going to work, was staying really close and having what I would call really open and vulnerable conversations with your clients, going, you know, having that confidence that we know what we can do is going to work, but how does it need to look to work for you? And as a service business, which is obviously the kind of the place we sit, it's really important that I think for me, I always sort of think about what we've got is, we've got our content, we've got our products, which is what we build, but then we've got the solution, which is how we deliver it to our clients. Mm-hmm. And all of those three are equally important. And I think sometimes it can be really easy to just go, hey, we're the experts, we're going to focus on those first two, building brilliant content and brilliant products. Yeah, but it's not in a solution that works for everybody else. So I think it helped us become a lot more solution and client focused around that, and really being clear. And I think that is more important now than probably ever in my 30 years of working, because the level of disruption, and COVID happened, and COVID was a big disruption. Technology has come and it's been a big disruption. I do believe we're in a more disruptive world than ever before, because barriers to entry have disappeared. Globalization is more than it's ever been before. So we've got to learn to live with that disruption. And the real sweet spot is being innovative in your content and products. Yeah. But actually staying deeply connected to the challenges, the needs, where your customers are or your clients are in that space.
That's an interesting, do you think that, I've got like two questions in my head right now and I don't know which one to pick first, but let's see. Do you think because obviously you've been working and been part of the corporate kind of world for 30 years, what has that really changed hugely, where people are just more aware that being vulnerable, by being authentic, that actually that British, and I'm allowed to say that being foreign, that British known stiff upper lip is slowly on disappearing? Or do you think that that's still massively ingrained?
Colin, I think it's a really interesting question. I think one of the real benefits that we have is we're not sector specific. So we have everything from gaming businesses, probably the most exciting clients that we have, because we've got the coolest offices by far. So we've got a couple of gaming clients through to financial services. And I'm not saying that they're not cool, but they're at a different end of the spectrum.
Different, yeah.
And I think it's really hard to answer your question in that genericism. What I think, and I just think perhaps, I think there's a different rate of change going on across those sectors.
Okay.
So I don't know whether that is typically some of those, I don't know whether it's from where's the head office, have many people been exposed to different cultures.
Yep.
But I also think there is more diversity in the workplace, and that is changing some of that thinking. I do wonder whether, I always find there is greater vulnerability post a crisis. That's one thing I would say. So I spent 25 years in financial services, and I think never has there been more vulnerability in financial services than post 2008. Never before would we have sat down with our competitors and just gone, okay, what's happened here? How are we going to solve this?
Yeah.
You know, so I think it really does, because I think you suddenly go from stopping fighting one another and actually fighting the real problems that are there. And that's kind of where I think, you know, I think there's greater examples of vulnerability when coming out of a crisis, middle of a crisis, than ever before.
Yeah, totally.
But I think, you know, if I look at the workplace, I think there's so much that's changed, and I don't know it's really interesting question. I don't know whether it's the cause or the effect, but I think, you know, you look at it, the dress code has changed. You know, I was up in the city, even in the heart of the city last week. It's quite hard to spot a tie these days, you know, whereas 15 years ago. So actually, I think how we show up. I'm also a big believer in, you know, I hate the work-life expression that is almost, they're two opposing forces. You are still the same human being, all right?
Yes.
It's not as if there's a magic switch. It's
don't get me on my soapbox about that one.
Yeah, you know, there was a cartoon when I was a kid called Mr. Ben, where he went into a changing room and he came out an astronaut and something like that. It's not like a magic changing room that you go in and out of when you go in and out of work. And I think we look at our own lives, and I think there are big shifts towards being more vulnerable, talk about mental health, mental well-being.
Yeah.
I think there's also some areas where broadcasting is not vulnerability, and we need to, you know, social media is broadcasting, it's not necessarily being vulnerable. And I think there's some challenges there, but I think there's a number of factors. I'd probably put it a little bit less down to the stiff British lip, but I can totally see where you're kind of coming from that. But I think it shows up. I think it's that slower change. We've got much more influence from overseas parent companies, and we've got much more global workforce. I worked for many years on Canary Wharf, and it was just the most amazing experience. You'd be standing in a sandwich shop and you could literally hear 4 or 5 different languages. And it's the one thing I miss about not working in London is it is a diverse place to work. It's exciting. And that's very different to when I started work. Very different to working in in sort of, you know, the early to mid 90s. So I think there's a number of factors which is changing it, and I think there's some really good parts to that progress.
As always, benefits and challenges, right, all at the same time.
100%.
So as an organization, that was my other question that was going through my head earlier. As an organization, with everything that's going on right now and the experience that you've had, what still keeps you awake at night? What are you still worried about?
The honest answer to that, Nell, is probably not a lot, but not because there's not any problems, but it's just not worthwhile. Do you know what I mean? I think one of my biggest learnings, and partly through, you know, I'm very lucky that I work for a human skills and behavioural change business, that I am surrounded and swamped and thrown into a lot of this stuff. So I think genuinely, you know, it is that spend the energy trying to solve the problem rather than wasting it. So I think genuinely it's a slightly flippant response, but I think ask for help is probably the next approach, you know, stuff. So I think some of the biggest, to answer it maybe in a slightly different way, when I do wake up, hopefully after a good night's sleep, what are the biggest challenges that I'm kind of facing? I think for us as a business, we're in what I would call, we've stepped out of startup and we're into scale up.
Okay.
And you know, I always sort of say to the team that in that scale up phase, you're kind of surfing on the crest of the wave, and you're all, you know, that's sort of growing. You're always going to be slightly under-resourced potentially. You always, you know, you're always kind of playing catch up a little bit in a really positive way.
Yeah.
And I think at the moment, with lots going on in the wider ecosystem that we work, you know, what's going on in the UK economy, we've likely got a change of government again next year, you know, with the inflationary pressures, with interest rate changes. So in the wider ecosystem that we're working at, there is still huge uncertainty. And I think therefore it's that planning process, and getting that planning process right from all of the different dimensions of running a business. So getting it right financially, getting it right for the team and our culture, because we're a growing business. We're going from everybody knowing everything about everybody, 7 or 8 people, to being in our 20s of numbers of staff, plus another
very different field
consultants. It's a really different feel. So I think it's really spinning what I would call those plates of growth, which is, and for us as well, because we are purely a B2B business, or although I always say we're a B2B2C business because we work with individuals on the other side, you know, it's quite lumpy as well. It's not as if, oh, well, I'm just targeting 5% extra users kind of stuff. You know, it's working with big companies and big contracts. So I think my biggest focus, and probably what I take most seriously, or the most important part of my job, is that planning, constantly assessing what's happening and the impact of different events on us, and really supporting the leaders within our business to navigate and pivot, because I think, you know, there is just lots of change, and we've got to always have that outward look.
Okay, so what is on your 5-year plan? Like, where is Ivy House in 5 years from now?
Look, I think what we want to set out is, myself and the founder always joke about this. There's certain words that I hate, like leading and best and all of that kind of stuff. I think they're very nebulous and just don't sort of attach. So I think for us, I'd love, you know, I think our target is to be the most recommended ever provider of talent and leadership programs within the UK. We do have a lot of global clients, we do deliver, but right now our focus, because I think it's a market that we understand, are those companies that certainly have a presence here. So I think for us, it's really nailing that. I think it's a market that is growing. Obviously, there are pressures on training budgets, but we are seeing a shift of that spend. I think people realize that they can spend training budgets very differently. You know, when I started work, the only way to learn how to price an equity was to either read a really, really dull book, which nobody did, or sit in a classroom and listen to somebody teach. Okay.
Yes.
That's gone. Okay. You can literally Google how to price an equity, and you will have amazing professors from around the world teach it in probably 20 different ways, which will then be quite confusing. But, you know, it is a very different place. So I think, you know, what we are seeing is, and I think a real recognition, the lens has been put on humans in the workplace with so many different dimensions around that. So for us, it is about becoming the most recommended. And that's the most important thing for me, is that, you know, we have a business value of remarkable quality. We want to be that name. And it's a question that we always ask when somebody approaches us is, how did you hear about us?
Nice.
That's really, really important to us. So if we can be the most recommended, that would be our number one success. Within that, how are we going to do that, I guess, would kind of be the next piece. And I think I think there's a number of angles. I think it's really recognizing the different audiences in the workplace. So, you know, it goes back a little bit to where we were talking at the beginning, that although the core pieces behind it, or the core content behind it, is very similar for different audience groups, everybody, you know, personalization is one of the biggest words out there. And this comes down to when we learn, we have to look at how we choose to learn outside of the workplace to understand what's going to work best. Which always bemuses me, why, you know, when we all learn how to change a light bulb by Google or YouTube, that we're still insisting that many of our schools are textbooks, Henry VIII's wives and everything else. It's like, hang on, it's just not naturally fitting kind of stuff. So it's really about, and what we see is Gen Z, which is starting work, which we think is probably the most exciting population ever. It's the most educated, the most innovative. We just need to support them. How we deliver, how they understand themselves, has to be completely different to how we might do it to the top end of the millennial generation, who are now starting to be leaders within the businesses. And just to give you an example, you know, if you put grads in a room for 3.5 hours, it's not going to work. It's just not going to wash. Okay. They're not sat still for 3.5 hours unless it's a computer game. So, you know, and I think that is really comes back to We know the needs there. How do we make it work for the different populations?
Yeah. Now, the coach in me instantly goes, so for you to know that you are the most recognized or recommended company in the UK, how will you measure that? But anyway, that's a throwaway one there straight away. What are some of the challenges that you think will come up in the next 5 years that might stop you from achieving your goals?
It's a great question, and obviously one that we look at. The headline, I think, is getting distracted.
Okay.
Chasing the wrong squirrels, as I always say to the team. And what I mean by that is it would be really easy for us to think we're a technology business. We're not. Okay. We can use technology in a way to have the maximum impact that we can. But I think it's really easy to go, golly, look at this shiny new bright thing. We could do this. And, we know that working with companies, trying to get big UK PLCs to get through their firewalls and to do all of this and stuff, we've really got to stay true to what's the problem we're trying to solve, what solution is going to work for the customer that we're looking at, how do we make that brilliant? And getting that balance between being innovative but still being relevant for our audience, okay, I think is really going to be our challenge. And I think there are so many, and so, AI is a classic one. It's really easy to go, wow, we could do this and we could go for that. And actually, is our client base ready for that right now? Is that the best way of solving the problem? So it's getting that balance of staying innovative and relevant for different audiences. And I particularly focus on Gen Z, and recognizing that, yes, all of these new toys have come out, but as humans, we're still very slow to develop. So we don't always know how to use that technology. But I think getting distracted is probably going to be our biggest challenge.
Well, does that mean there are certain changes that you're going to have, that you already know that you're going to have to make as a business?
Yes, at different levels, I think. I think certainly we are recognizing that as, the likes of Gen Z become a bigger proportion of the workplace, the way and the structure in which we deliver our learning will and should change. So I think from what we do, I think there's also going to be some changes, and I'm not quite sure where we are on what will happen to the workplace. I think the jury's out a little bit. We're going through a sort of slightly passive aggressive approach of getting people back into the office, it seems, with many clients. But
there's definitely a massive variety what I'm seeing.
There is. But I think we would, over the last 3 months, over the last quarter, have seen a huge increase for getting people back into the room. Not for everything, but people have to connect at some point in person. And that's, and look, for all of the amazing stuff that technology's done, we still need that. So at the core and heart of it, it's really easy to forget the absolute guiding principles and get distracted by this shiny new stuff. And it's getting that balance between going, yes, that will make it better, or that's the direction we are going to go in, but not get distracted. So I think there are changes, both from, as I say, what we do. The workplace is going to carry on changing over the next few years, and we will have to change with it. As a business, we will also need to change as we go through that scale up kind of process. And I think, from that aspect, it's particularly one of the things we've been looking at recently is obviously you've just got to get much more, I would say organized the right word, but we've got to have much better data, much better insights, much better operationally. When you're a small startup, everybody knows everything that's going on.
Yes.
You scale up, that becomes different. You've now got teams of people that look at stuff. So I think it's for me, in my role, it's really navigating What do we need to change as a business, irrelevant of what's going on outside? What's going on in our marketplace that's changing? Then how do you put the two together?
How do you put them together? So what do you still want to achieve in the next 5 years? Not with the business, but you, Kate.
Golly, that's an interesting question. I think there's a couple of things. Is what would I like to achieve? I think, like every CEO's job or leader's job, it should be that actually I'm not needed, because that will indicate that the team that we put underneath has grown and has been successful. Or I'm not needed in my current capacity, I should say.
Of course.
They might always feel that they need to ask me something, but they're not needed in that current capacity. And and certainly there may be different needs in a different size business. So I think, it's actually enabling that growth. And I think so I think from my, I view my personal objectives from what are my objectives as a business. I want to provide a place which stretches people, where people feel trusted and that they can grow. So in order to do that, I have to step out of everything that I do today, by definition. Otherwise, there is no growth. You end up with kind of a limit. So in that time when I'm sitting there going, oh, I don't do any of that stuff that I used to do, what could I say is, well, I really hope I've been part of something that has changed the way UK PLC works. Because if we can change the way the people work within UK PLCs, I should say, I think we can get to a place where people are happier at work. If they're happier at work, it enters into a whole different knock-on impact around health and well-being. But I also think UK PLC will do better. And as an economist at heart, I'd like to see the UK economy do better. So I think if we can be part of the making organizations work better, we do that through supporting their people, and at the same time build a business that we've provided individuals with growth, some exciting challenges, maybe a bit of stretch at the time, sense of achievement. I'd happily hang up my boots at that point in time, I think, now.
Wow. I love that one. That's such a great answer. Legacy sprang to mind when you were saying that. It's leaving that legacy, isn't it? Knowing that you've been part of a change, which is invaluable almost. What would you say to 18-year-old Kate if you had the opportunity to go back?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's a question we ask quite a lot of our delegates, because we work with schools as well, which is probably what I haven't mentioned. We do some work with sixth formers, so we quite often get our delegates to ask them. And I'm actually going to pinch one phrase that Claire Moriarty, who is the CEO of Citizens Advice Bureau, I was lucky enough to do a fireside chat with her at an event, and then she said, which was, be yourself, but don't expect anybody else to be like you.
Oh, nice.
Which I think there's a lot in there. It's quite a simple thing, but I think, and with that, it's therefore get to know yourself. I loved maths at school, inevitably then ended up in finance, and probably differentiated, or probably didn't understand for the best part of 20 years of my career, being good at something and you can be good at something, but that's not just dictating what you're doing. It's about being good at something, and everyone's got to be good enough at something in order to have a career out of it, but finding that sweet spot where find something that you're good about in a place or a situation that you feel really passionate. So, in my time in financial services, I will confess I was a banker for many years, but I also spent a lot of time in financial education. And, my one regret is that I'd love, I think for me, the two things that would connect that passion is every child in this country should be taught basic budgeting.
Oh, I tell you what, I run a slightly different podcast as well as this one, and that's one of my questions. What what's something that you learned at school that you're still using to date, or what should be taught in school now as a business owner? And 9 out of 10, that's the answer that comes back.
Yeah.
Like common sense, practical,
Yep.
financial advice.
Yeah. Basic finance, basic nutrition would solve a lot of our problems. So I think, the one thing, as I say, the one thing is be yourself, but don't expect anyone else to be like you, because get to know yourself, be confident in what your abilities are, know what your strengths are, and then find that right place for you to do it.
Yeah.
And know that everyone else isn't like you, and that's okay. So you don't have to fit into them.
Totally.
Go with curiosity and everything else. The other one, which I really wish someone had told me, because I think for some reason there was kind of a switch that went on in probably turning 50 when this appeared, was if something is worrying you or there's a problem, is actually to take a step back and ask yourself a series of questions, which is, number one, will you still remember this in 5 years? And if the answer is no, walk away from it. Okay, forget it. Okay, because it isn't that big a problem. If the answer is, will you and somebody else remember it, then that's big enough to go, right, I need some help on this.
Okay.
And I think having that ability to stop and reflect. Too often, I know in my career, I think, and it's probably slightly linked to that first one, is to just kind of get swept along.
Yeah.
And I think if you combine that really understanding, I made one career move, which lasted about 3.5 months. And it was the worst decision and yet the best thing I'd ever done, because actually it gave me the biggest learning, and it helped me to get to that point of knowing who I was so I could be myself. And that completely changed all of the choices I made in work there afterwards. So yeah, those would probably be the two bits.
A strength in failure, isn't there?
100%.
I think too often, again, hindsight, that we don't understand. But I see that, for example, in my nieces who are very, very young. It's a huge thing when they don't win or when they don't get something straight away. And I look at that and I go, you don't understand how valuable this lesson is. But interesting. Last question. What would your top 2 tips be for anybody that right now is either starting out in business or thinking about starting a business? What are your top 2 bits of advice for them?
Golly. A really obvious one, I suppose, is probably something that I think has probably come out on this, is really spend the time getting to know who your customers are and how they're changing. Because I think when you're starting out, it's sometimes quite easy to go, I've got the best idea in the world. Okay. And it may well be the best idea, but if it's 5% away from how everybody else wants to use it, you are 95% of the way there and you'll end up with nothing. So I think, whether that is to say stay outward looking is probably the easiest way of doing it. The other one as well, which I think probably links back to one of the things that you said, ask for help. I think there are so many people that love talking about what they do. That sounds awful, but I think they're coming from a place of being really proud about what they do. And the human nature in us is, 98% of the world are really, really nice people. And they want to help and support. And I think therefore it's finding your network. I think when you're starting out a business, it's really easy to get lonely and isolated. And I certainly felt that during COVID, which was particularly exaggerated. My golly, if it hadn't been for Zoom calls with some just amazing mentors to me and reaching out to people, I'm not sure I would have made it through. So I think it's build your network. So they're probably both quite linked, aren't they? They're both outward facing,
And they're also both people orientated.
Get to know the people you're trying to serve, the market that you're trying to serve. And talk to people. And And it's also, I'm not saying go and talk to your competitor, because they might not want to talk to you, but go and talk to people that can just challenge your thinking, listen to their experiences, and listen, and really listen to those lessons that they've learned, to take them away and go, actually, how can I take those back to me? As I said, you know, when I spoke to Claire Moriarty in a sort of a fireside chat, you know, our worlds are completely different. You know, she headed up National Rail and stuff like that. She's been in the public, amazing roles in the public sector, but there were so many lessons that I could take away, even building a scale up. So really listen to those lessons that people can share.
Absolutely love that one. I often see that one, sadly. People ask a question, but they don't really want to listen to the answer. Yeah.
Unless it's not exactly in the format that they want to hear, they shut off quite quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not answering my question. Well, that's not really what the purpose of the conversation was.
Yeah, exactly. Kate, thank you so much.
Not at all. Lovely to see you.
Absolutely love this. What a great conversation. And I used, this is probably the first interview where I've used the least amount of the questions that I would normally ask. So that's a good one.
I talk a lot now. Is that the outcome of that?
No. The outcome of that is we've just discussed things really wonderfully on a totally different level. And I've absolutely loved it. So thank you very much.
It's been a lot of fun. Brilliant.
The link to connect up to Kate and to Ivy House will be in the comment section below. So please go and do that. Thank you very much for watching the Business Spotlight. Until next time.